Thank you, Calvin, and we certainly want to thank the Cotton Museum for inviting us to be here. We're very proud to be a part of it and this series, and we hope you find this quite fascinating tonight because our roots, your roots, are deep in the cotton field. So I want you to take a look up here as you see the Italians of Sunnyside, the history from 1895. You're looking at one of the hottest selling books in the country. It is selling 7 times faster than the average author in the United States. So we're very proud of that. It is already been sold in over 40 states in 4 countries, and this book is just finished being translated 100% into Italian. So we're very, very excited about that. In 2019, we put together the foundation to preserve our heritage. This foundation is growing strong. So many of you are supporting it. We're very grateful for that, and we're proud, Gina and I, to be leading this organization. The biggest landmark about Lake Village, Arkansas, which many of you know about, your roots are there, is the big landmark is Lake Chico. It's the nation's largest oxbow lake. It's in the form of a C, and it runs right alongside the Mississippi River. And this is very important because as we tell the story tonight and as you read in the book, you will see that this anatomy of the colony is very crucial. This little area right up here is just very thick woods, but it's a swampland. Before this levee was built here, this was connected to Lake Chico. So the only entry point and exit point into the Italian colony was right here. And part of the story, as you'll read in the book, is that the Italians were brought here and were sold these 12.5-acre plots, and they were to farm that acreage because that's how much a family expected to be able to handle was 12.5 acres, a family of about 6 individuals. So this was the Italian colony, all inside the lake. This colony was here for one purpose, to provide labor for the plantation known as the Sunnyside Plantation. And this landmass is the Sunnyside Plantation. Let me tell you how big it is. It ran 30 miles north and south and 15 miles east and west. It was a massive piece of land. It was one of the top 10 plantations in the United States. So why did the Italians get here? Why form a colony at Sunnyside? This is why. King Cotton. And an interesting fact about cotton is that in 1790, no cotton was produced in America, not a single boll. 1790, no cotton in the United States. But by 1860, at the zenith of cotton, it was the #1 export in the United States. It accounted for 57% of all total U.S. exports. That's total exports, not just agricultural exports, but also industrial exports. That's how important cotton was to the United States at that time by 1860. And Arkansas was the #2 producing state in the nation. Anybody want to guess what the #1 state was? Mississippi, that's right. And Sunnyside was one of only 10 plantations in the nation that had over 500 slaves. It was an elite cotton producing plantation in the nation. It was a machine in the United States. It was famous, it was strong, and it was down in Lake Village, Arkansas, southeast Arkansas, in the heart of the Mississippi Delta. There was a big fight for ownership of the Sunnyside Plantation, but it was finally bought around 1880 by a company called the Calhoun Land Company. Now, the Calhoun Land Company was thought to be the great saving enterprise for the South after the Civil War. It was talked about in Mark Twain's book, Living Life Along the Mississippi River. So the Calhoun Land Company had this big plan that they were going to convince all the African Americans to continue working on the plantations. And so the Calhoun Land Company says, we'll buy Sunnyside Plantation, and they needed to finance it. And they bought it, and they had it financed through a New York banker named Austin Corbin. So the Calhoun Land Company took over Sunnyside, and the African Americans said, you know, we don't like your plan. nothing in it for us. You guys will get rich. We're moving on to Chicago, Detroit, St. Louis, anywhere but the cotton patch. So the Calhoun Land Company went bankrupt. And when it went bankrupt, it fell into the hands of the financier, Austin Corbin. So Corbin acquires the plantation about 1893. Well, what's going on in Italy at this time? Quite interesting. In Italy, it had a civil war as well in 1860. We think of Italy being around for centuries, the Holy Roman Empire and the mighty Roman Empire, and it's been around all the way back as far as we can think. Well, that's not the case, because Italy was actually made up of multiple kingdoms. You had the classes of the nobility that owned all the land. You had a small middle class of tradesmen, but you had a massive class of peasants who all worked for the nobility. And in 1860, there was a big civil war. The peasants revolted. Italy became into shambles. The nobility lost a lot of their stature, and all the jobs, most of the jobs throughout Italy dried up because the nobility were not in a financial shape to keep those families employed. In the United States at that time, where land was abundant, work was everywhere, and you had the opportunity to have a place for yourself, your own home for your own family. So it was an opportunistic time to seek a better opportunity. So now we have Corbin. We turn back to the United States. Corbin's now at the head of the Sunnyside Plantation, and he thought to himself, well, I can sell this place, or how hard can farming really be? Everybody knows that's easy. You just drop a seed in the ground, it sprouts, you pick it, and make lots of money, right? Well, so he decides to get cheap labor, because that's the engine that makes the plantation work. So he makes a deal with the Arkansas prison system, and he thought that he would get all this cheap labor from the prisoners, and he thought that would give these prisoners some work to do, and it would take the burden off of the criminal justice system in the state of Arkansas. But the prisoners just didn't like working, and so that failed. And that even though this failed, Corbin, the eternal optimist, kept doubling down because land was cheap at this time. So buy low and hope that it appreciates. So he kept expanding the Sunnyside Plantation to over 13,000 acres. But now, instead of needing 500 slaves, because he's grown the Sunnyside Plantation, he needs thousands of laborers. Well, I can't get it from the prisoners. I can't get it from the African Americans. Where can I find laborers? Well, just so happened, Corbin was quite wealthy, had international connections, and the best connection he had was his niece was married to an Italian prince called Emanuele Ruspoli. And he had thousands and thousands of Italians working his land, but now many of them were idle because the economy was so bad. They put together a deal where the Italian families who first come, first serve, who were willing to buy the Sunnyside Plantation, a 12.5 acre plot for $2,000, $160 an acre, and a house for $150. And Italians jumped at it. Wow, I can work forever in Italy and never own property or land, or I can go to America and work for 20 years because this loan to buy this land will be financed over 20 years. I can go to America, work for 20 years, own this land, own my own home, and I'll be in the land of milk and honey where not only cotton grows in abundance, but money grows everywhere on trees. So, here they came in 1895. 100 of our ancestors came, 562 Italians came in November of 1895. And then a second boat came in 1897 with 72 families, and they were full of hope and optimism. They're going to America, the place of dreams, where everything would be. It was described to them as a golden city. This colony would be a model colony for the world, and it would be made of wonderful Italians, and they would grow cotton. And they had great hopes, and in the book you'll see where Mother talks about the hopes and dreams that these families had from direct communication she had in her research. But unfortunately, they were struck with reality and disaster very, very quickly. Just on the journey over was quite excruciating. And you'll read in the book many of these stories of those immigrants that came over on the first, second, and later boats, the devastation that they felt, the starvation that they had, and how some died at sea and were buried at sea. So from the very onset, things started looking a little grim as the Italians were coming to their new homeland. In 1893, there were only 100 Italians at most in the state of Arkansas. With just the foundations of the Sunnyside Italian colony, the Italian population in Arkansas increased by tenfold, with 1,000 new Italians arriving in 1895 and 1897. Quite a change very quickly. And they came to America full of hope and promise. But after they arrived, a panic happened very quickly. Just 1 year after the colony was established, not even a year, 9 months after the colony was established, in June of 1896, Austin Corbin dies. And by late 1897, 125 of the 1,000 colonists had died, approximately 15% of the colony. The heirs of Corbin decided to lease it to the Crittenden Land Company. And Mother goes into all of this into great deal and vividness in the book, and you'll find it very riveting. So the Crittenden Land Company, made up of primarily Senator Leroy Percy of Mississippi, very powerful senator from Mississippi, and he had 2 partners with him. They have to come in immediately and do damage control. And so the Italians now found out, during those first 2 years, they found out that they bought the land for $160 an acre when it was worth, in some places, $3 an acre. And in other places, the most prime land was worth $50 an acre. And all the land was sold at $160 an acre, anywhere from 50 times, 3 to 50 times its actual value. So the Italians were complaining now that the land was too expensive, the terms were too hard, and it really wasn't fair. So they put that on Senator Leroy Percy and the Crittenden Company and said, we would like some changes if you want us to stay. We'll endure the malaria, we'll endure the death, but we got to have changes to the contract. So the Crittenden Land Company thought about it, reviewed it, and says, okay, we'll give you some new terms. They took their contracts, which you'll see in the book, ripped them up, said the contracts are over, the land you bought is no longer yours, it's ours, and you're going to work for us under the new terms we give you, which is you'll get a small portion of the proceeds from your labor from the cotton. Well, that was great PR, let me tell you, because the Italians said, we're out of here. So 80% of them decided to leave. There were some Italians who did decide to stay, some of those who had better pieces of land, some of those who thought that they could make a profit, and some who owed debts to the company. So the contract was rewritten. Italians started dispersing everywhere. A big group went to Taneytown, a big group went to Rosati, Missouri, a big group went to Irondale, Alabama, some went to Hot Springs, some returned to Italy, and some started being lured and recruited all across the Mississippi Delta. And if you're in debt to somebody, according to Arkansas law, then they have the right, the person you owe the money to has the right to keep you and make you work for them until your debt is paid. In addition to that, they had the lynching threat that was held over the Italians that were arriving. Now, many people don't realize that. They think the worst lynchings in U.S. history occurred to African Americans. That's not true. It happened to Italian Americans. In 1891, when the Italians arrived at New Orleans in 1895, they had a big fear because 11 Italians had been lynched there in 1891. But then after the Italians arrived, lynchings occurred at St. Charles. 5 Italians were lynched in Tallulah, Louisiana. That was just 60 miles away from Sunnyside. And then there were 6 episodes of lynchings in the last decade of the 1800s. Riders on horseback were always watching the Italians with shotguns to make sure that they would not escape from the plantation. And if you all remember, I showed you in the very beginning the picture of Sunnyside, the map, the lake. There was one entry point in, one entry point out. It was very well and very easy to guard Sunnyside from people trying to escape. And the message was very clear. If you want to escape, we have a noose ready for your neck to keep you. That is the threat that you have and the worry you have if you tried to leave after we've paid to get you here at our plantation. In the book, you'll find that Mother does a great deal of showing this terrific battle that occurs, a battle of wits between the handsome, beautiful orator, Senator Leroy Percy, and his aristocratic wife, Camille, against the shy, the quiet, but the very determined Mary Grace Quackenbos, who was later called and deemed the first female Sherlock Holmes. So this great epic battle occurs between these two in this federal investigation about the treatment, labor practices against our ancestors. And Mother goes into great detail in the book telling you about what was found in the Quackenbos investigation, horrific stories of mistreatment and survival. But Senator Percy had a great trump card. He was hunting buddies with President Roosevelt. And they take that investigation and all the information she found, that she uncovered, and they bury it in the National Archives, never to be seen again until the 1980s. Unbelievable. 1980s. Nearly 70 years later, it was uncovered by a couple of researchers, one from the United States, Professor Randolph Bain, and another from Italy, Ernesto Milani. So there was no relief for the Italian families. This all occurred from 1906 to about 1912, and the Italians continued to endure. And one of the nice things about it that we're very proud of, and one of our great legacy is that our Italian ancestors endured. They had an amazing faith in God. Their belief that better days were to come because of His grace, that He would see them through, was just amazing, and that's a legacy we're so proud of, their legacy of faith. As Mother puts on the title of her book, A People of Faith, Hope, and Love. And their faith is what carried them through these very difficult ordeals. And by World War II, the plantation had almost been completely sold off. And some historians at that time say that's the end of the story. Italians left the South, they filtered out through the United States, they went back to the North or went back to Italy, the families blended in with society, no more Italians in the South. Well, that wasn't the case. The story doesn't end there, and Mother carries the story forward. The United States goes to war, World War II in 1940, because Mussolini decides to become partners with Adolf Hitler. And who's their number one enemy? The United States of America. And so now great suspicion comes upon the Italian community and the Italians of Sunnyside during World War II. A great amount of suspicion and bigotry is displayed toward the Italian community. But they persevered. And Italian Americans were fought in World War II, but the U.S. government were very suspicious, and in Lake Village they had the U.S. Postal Service watch all the Italians in Lake Village, kept track of them, had the name of every Italian in Lake Village, what their activities were, and if there was any suspicious activity, they were to report it to the federal government. Well, our postmaster in Lake Village was very, very diligent in watching the Italians, and he watched them so much, he decided to marry one. And in Lake Village, Arkansas, most all of the Italians during that period of time in the late 1940s became U.S. citizens because they wanted to prove that they were Americans, and they were proud to be Americans. And one of the interesting things was why so many of us don't know this history and what they endured, because they thought it was their patriotic duty to never speak negative about the United States or what they had to endure to become a U.S. citizen. I want to tell you one little story about some of the descendants of Sunnyside. Memphis became a city of opportunity since we're here in Memphis. Many Italians from the 1898 to 1950, thousands of them moved up here to Memphis. Many of your families, that's why you're here today, moved here to Memphis. Many of them left farming, the cotton fields, and they decided to own shops or became skilled craftsmen. Some of them remained in farming. Some of them owned restaurants. And I'll tell you about one particular one that's an example of this city and the influence that the Italians of Sunnyside had nationwide. You see this home right here was home of the Borgonones at the Sunnyside Plantation. And the Borgonones had, and Alpes, Marcella Alpi married a Borgonone, and they had 11 children. Here's the first 5. They were all girls. This one right here, the oldest, was Dale Borgonone, who worked in the cotton fields. And she moved to Memphis in 1929 during the Great Depression. I remember her telling me that she got her first check after a week of work. It was 90 cents. Unbelievable. Well, Dale Borgonone Taylor, she came to Memphis, married a gentleman named Carlos Taylor. Here she is here with her siblings again. There's Dale, and there's my father on the front row. She came here to Memphis, worked many years, and then finally opened a restaurant downtown. And then later she bought and opened another restaurant right here on Union Street in this building. And she did that in 1949. And when she did that in 1949, a few months later, another man named Sam Phillips bought a small studio next to her cafe called Sun Studios, Sun Records. Well, Sun Records was just so tiny, and if you ever take a tour of it, it's right up the street. Sun Records was so small that Sam Phillips had no place to do any of his business. So he had a booth reserved for him in my Aunt Dale Borgonone's restaurant, where he did all of his paperwork. And in would come people like Elvis Presley and Johnny Cash, Carl Perkins, the Killer, Jerry Lee Lewis, Roy Orbison would all come, and they would either eat, do business, write songs, put together music in this cafe, in this diner owned by an Italians of Sunnyside descendant, or they would stay upstairs in one of her lofts that she rented out, apartments, bedrooms that she rented out for these would-be stars. And so these are the type people, as I just mentioned. There's Sam Phillips over there. There's the $1 Million Quartet right here in Memphis, right there in an Italian ladies from Sunnyside's restaurant. And Elvis signed his contract right in her restaurant, at one of her dining tables. And if you go over there to the museum, you will see at Sun Record Museum, they now call her restaurant Sun Diner, but it was actually called Dale's or Taylor's Restaurant. But that's where Elvis and rock and roll got kicked off, was there from the Italians of Sunnyside. I want to claim that. Rock and roll was born there. And not only do I say that, but right here, Sam Phillips, who claimed he did not have a desk, had his own booth at Taylor's, Dale Taylor Borgonone's restaurant, to pour over paperwork. There were all the guys there writing of the music and talking, and that's where the Sun sound was really born. Who says that? Not Anthony Borgonone, but Jack Clement, the Sun studio producer. We're very proud of the Delta. We're proud of the struggle they shared, and it is something that we'll always cherish. Speriamo di vederti presto. We hope you come see us soon down in Lake Village. We have the beautiful Sunnyside Museum. We have so many pictures. Your ancestors are probably there. We have the Lakeport Plantation, which was a sister plantation to the Sunnyside Plantation. It is mentioned in the book. The Lakeport Plantation gives you a great representation where our ancestors worked. We have the Heiner Cemetery, the only cemetery in the United States where only Italians are buried. It is one of the projects of our foundation to have a restoration of it, but yet we still have today some of the gravestone heads that are written in Italian that you can see. It is a very special tour to go to the Heiner Cemetery. Of course, we have the beautiful Mississippi River. We have the gorgeous Lake Chico and the wonderful lands, the Sunnyside lands themselves. You can go and see where our ancestors worked. It will be breathtaking to you to see the massive side of the land that our people worked and where they lived. How do you reach us? How do you keep in contact with us? I ask that all of you go on to Facebook and join with us. We're very grateful that Steve Fertini that allows us to use his Facebook page in addition to ours. We're very grateful to him because we know so many of you follow his Facebook page and you also follow ours. We ask you to also check out our website, theitaliansofsunnyside.org. Every week on Facebook, we put out a new story about our heritage, things that are not in the book. I know you'll enjoy them. We have so much to share. We learn more. I hear more stories all the time. We add new things. The story never ends. So share the book, share our heritage. I want to tell you one last thing, and that is Professor Randolph Bain. He was the gentleman, he and Ernesto Milani found the Quackenbos report in the National Archives in the 1980s. He received the book, and then he wrote me this email, and he says, Anthony, the Italians of Sunnyside arrived today. I am ecstatic. I've been devouring it for hours. It is beautifully written, generously illustrated, over 700 illustrations in it. It has a full name index. It is fully footnoted and creatively organized. I'm so proud of your mother, a book that any historian will be proud to have authored. I'm very proud of my mother who's worked on this history for over 50 years. I'm very proud of this book. I'm proud that it's coming out in Italian. I want to thank the Cotton Museum for what you do of promoting this heritage of where we all came from, the cotton industry. And if there is any time you want to contact me, I'm very easy to get a hold of through the Italians of Sunnyside Foundation. If any of y'all have questions, I'll let you get some refreshments, some drinks. But thank you so much for coming. It was an honor to be here with all of you. Thank you so much.